is Katherine Cammack, who's going to clue in insurance. Thank you, Katherine.
Ladies, it has been great to be in Palm Beach with you all, and thank you, Anna and Alice. It has been a tremendous workshop. I have learned from every speaker, and thank you for designing and planning a workshop that's been so informative. Today, Alice asked me to talk about insurance, and I'm presenting a program on behalf of the National Trust for Insurance Services. They designed an insurance program for the Colonial James and our museum properties that we own and manage. Insurance, it's not always the most exciting topic to hear about. In fact, I thought I'd lose half the audience at the break, so thank you for coming back. When most of us hear insurance, we think about life insurance or health insurance, particularly in this world of Obamacare. But today we're going to talk about insurance as it relates to your museum properties. Insurance can be one of the single greatest threats to protecting a revitalized or restored historic site or museum properties. By the end of my talk today, I hope that you'll leave with some ideas of how that you can more safely protect your museum property, your collections, and your societies against disasters, lawsuits, or unexpected events. So let's go through some things and let's imagine some, I'm going to be better at this, some situations. What if a fire or a windstorm happens to you? Would your insurance program pay for restoration or not? I'm going to go back one slide and say most insurance companies, their policies pay new for old. So if you have a claim, your building policy would put new building materials in place of what you had. This is the Burgwyn Wright House in Wilmington. We had a claim in 1996 with Hurricane Fran. And you see the beautiful shutters along the side of the house here. Those shutters, this house is from 1770, 1785, that period. Our insurance company was Chubb at that time, which was part of this historic program. Chubb went out and helped us find shutters from that period made in that era, the late 18th century, from those materials, and they rebuilt the shutters from the old wood to fit this house. They didn't go out and build new shutters, tell us to get new shutters from Home Depot to put back on our house. Then the kitchen on the slide on the right, which is behind our house, had roof damage. They helped us find old building materials to match the roof so that we could have an historically accurate kitchen outbuilding after the loss. This was very important to our headquarters house. What if a fire starts during a renovation and causes smoke and water damage to the work recently completed, as well as to a portion of the historic house? Do you know how your insurance would respond? In most standard insurance policies, there is either a limitation or an exclusion for work under renovation at your house. This can easily be remedied, but in standard policies there's an exclusion. What if a pipe burst on the second floor and a large section of the original ceiling mural and gold leaf is irreparably damaged? Do you know how your insurance would respond? Would your policy match the building materials? Would they be of the same quality? Would the gold leaf be of the same quality? What if a large donor to the museum property or society is unhappy with the direction that the management is taking and sues the board of directors for mismanagement. Is your board protected for the legal costs to defend this action? And is your board protected for the legal liability if you're found negligent or liable? What if smoke and fire damage takes months to repair and your largest income producing event is now unable to take place as planned, creating a huge hole in your budget? Karen just talked about disaster planning. There is a way to insure this. You can buy the insurance, but if you haven't bought the insurance, you need to at least talk about the disaster planning. So this is an occurrence we need to think about. What if a fire destroys 60% of your building's historic attributes? Not enough to declare a total loss, but enough to initiate reclamation of your tax benefits. How does your current insurance policy address this? The National Trust for Insurance Services program is designed for the National Society's properties has coverage for that. That is normally not covered under any current insurance programs. What if you spend thousands of dollars in additional renovation costs to include green or sustainable building materials and craftsmanship in your historic building? How would your current insurance program handle that? After a loss, would it pay for those additional costs to upgrade your building back to those same standards? Normally, policies don't do that. The National Trust Insurance Services shares the same passions that we do. All they do is insure historic properties. They match historic exposures and operations that are excluded or limited in standard insurance programs. They will help insure to our mission. So if we have gone through a disaster planning process, like Karen talked about, identified mission critical exposures, we can then match our insurance programs to those things and decide what we want to insure, what we want to avoid, and match our programs to fit that. They also have a special person identified just to deal with National Society properties. We have a single point of contact there. And lastly on this list, if you go with this program, we have an appraisal that is included at no additional charge for our museums. This has been incredibly valuable to the properties that have gone with this. Most of us have a really difficult time discerning what the value is of our museum properties. And they give us a hard copy of an appraisal for our museum property at no additional cost. These are some of the coverages. I'm going to talk about a few of them today, but these are some of the coverages that are available in the insurance program through National Trust in the NSCDA insurance program. Building coverage. Which one of these do you all have now on your museum property? I put in red what I highly recommend that you have, and that is historic replacement cost. You'll see all these other types of coverages. I recommend that you have agreed value with historic replacement costs. Many times you'll see these other coverages on policies for our museums. They will do an adequate job, but not the best job at the time of the loss. Historic replacement costs is the form that will allow the insurance company to give you historic building materials at the time of the loss. So if you have a loss, the company will help you find historic building materials to replace the damaged portion of your building. It will not depreciate after the loss, so it will give you, pay the loss without depreciation. Agreed value is one of the best insurance things, best insurance clauses that ever invented. And all that means is that before a loss, you, your museum properties, and the insurance company mutually agree to the value of your property. And at the time of the loss, any co-insurance penalties are waived because you all have agreed together, you have agreed at the value of your museum property. So many of us say, oh, I cannot afford to insure my museum house for what it's actually worth. Well, this is something where you negotiate and you say, okay, National Trust Insurance Services, my house may be worth $5, but I'm willing to insure it for $3. Will you accept that? And it's a negotiation between your agent, you, and National Trust Insurance Services. And they may take a lower value to insure it than what it's actually worth. And so you agree on that, and if they agree on that, everybody agrees on that, that's what the policy is written for. So it's an agreed value. The program that we have in place, these are some of the things. Historic replacement costs, which we just talked about. Guaranteed replacement costs. That means if the National Trust Insurance Services has said, okay, we agree that we'll issue that policy for $3 million, and at the time of the loss, something terribly unforeseen happens and your whole house is taken away, $3 million wasn't enough to rebuild it or repair it at the time of the loss, they'll take it up as high as it needs. It guarantees that they will repair your property. The cash settlement option is probably one of the best things that we were able to negotiate. Laura, I don't know if Laura Myers is here today, but when she talked about the Adding Home experience, she mentioned something in Up Park where the whole property was destroyed. The cash settlement option gives us as museum owners and caretakers the control. It gives us the option to accept the cash at the time of the loss so that we can either go out and buy a new museum property or repair and rebuild the new structure. In standard insurance policies, you have to rebuild and repair. You are not able to get the cash. Or if you get the cash, it's a much lower settlement. It's half to 2/3 of the value that's on your insurance policy. This will give you the full limit on your policy. If you're buying $3 million, it would give you $3 million, and you could go out and buy another property if you decided not to rebuild or repair from the ground up. That's one of the things I hear from societies as I go around and talk to you all. And you said, well, we'd never rebuild it if we had a total loss. This option gives you the ability to go out and find another historic property because you would have the cash. That would be part of your disaster planning. The agreed limit with no co-insurance we've talked about. Appraisals I've mentioned that come as part of this program. The green endorsement gives you the increased coverage for the additional cost to add those building materials. And then for smaller societies, there are other options for smaller societies with smaller museum properties that are not as with high values like some of our larger museum properties, or those with just collections. You don't have to go with the National Trust Insurance Services. You can go with somebody that understands historic properties. But the things that many policies lack are they don't understand the significance of our properties and collections, the integrity of our properties, and the age of them. And so they miss some of these things. They don't understand the tax benefits that we receive. They don't understand how much that it takes to restore these, or the ordinance and law problems that we have after a loss where it costs a lot more to rebuild our properties and repair them after a loss. So just remember that when you are working with an insurance agent, just be sure they understand the significance of your historic property. Now we're switching from buildings and properties to liability. And liability it generally means injuries to somebody else, not your employees and not yourself. Injuries to visitors, performers, subcontractors, children, or people attending your workshops, special events. I put subcontractors in a different category, and I think some people from the New York Society are here, and you might be able to tell us one of your experiences if you all were involved in the board at that time. But subcontractors, most all of you all that have a museum property hire people to take care of your grounds, probably people to clean up your janitorial services, those types of things. Those likely are not employees. I recommend that you ask those people for certificates of insurance, and that certificate of insurance certifies that that business or individual has insurance, and that certificate of insurance also can name you or your museum as additional insured on their insurance in case they have an injury while working on your premises. New York had an incident with a window cleaner, and that was a window cleaner that did not supply them with a certificate of insurance, and the New York Society was held liable for the injury. And I believe, do any of you all remember how large the claim was against the society? I believe it went into the millions. It was a significant claim against the society because it was
a long time, probably before any.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. Oh, Anna. There. I'm looking at you. I missed you. I was looking at you.
Yeah. No. This was when we increased our liability insurance because I mean it was unbelievable. It was before my presidency, so I had just sort of arrived in New York, not too long before that, but. I mean, it was like the first day on the job, and he fell out of like the 4th story window. And we did do a little investigative work, and we actually settled that it was a much lower claim. I don't remember the exact, but it was in the millions. But he had, he was claiming that he was severely injured, and we did track him, and we found out that that was not exactly the case. That he was mobile, and he was claiming that he couldn't work and he couldn't do this, but we caught him on tape, so but he did so. We did so, but it wasn't as bad as it could have been. But that really motivated us to increase our liability insurance.
You can eliminate this exposure almost entirely with that certificate of insurance. So it's a simple matter of just requesting it and putting it in your file and updating it annually. Special events, Karen mentioned yesterday that at Dumbarton House they request certificates of insurance and special event insurance for weddings and those types of things. So when you have special events at your museum site, if you request that insurance, just be sure you get the certificate of insurance, and that just proves that that renter has the insurance, and it names you as additional insured and gives you a buffer layer before your insurance comes into play. We'll talk specifically later about alcohol, and then volunteers. Volunteer coverage varies by state on volunteers. Sometimes they're covered automatically by workers' comp, depending on the state, sometimes by their own health insurance, so it just varies by state, and you need to talk to your local insurance agent about volunteer coverage. The National Trust Insurance Services has some coverage for volunteers we'll talk about. Here we'll talk about volunteers. Volunteer coverage on this program gives you some AD&D coverage where workers' comp insurance is not available for them. And it's also helpful because sometimes the health insurance carrier will come back and subrogate against the museum property if the museum was found to be liable for the volunteer's accident. So it's just something, again, to be aware of and to have talked about at your museum. Let's talk liquor, ladies. Liquor liability is probably one of the most significant exposures we have at our museums when we have special events. The best advice I have for all of you all is to hire properly trained bartenders and caterers for your special events, and to request and receive the certificate of insurance and keep it on file. And that certificate of insurance, once again, I'm going to hammer it home, should name you as an additional insured. This at least gives you the buffer layer so that the bartenders and caterers insurance would be primary for any event, since they are serving the alcohol at the event. If there's a really bad accident, everybody's going to be named. Every person, every family is going to be named in the litigation. Just make sure you have the insurance. General liability insurance, which is part of most any business package, and we just talked about the general liability, has something in it automatically called host liquor liability. That's automatic coverage. And host liquor liability is for when you are just serving alcohol at our Dames events to ourselves. So we automatically have that. So if one of us, where we're serving alcohol, has a bad accident in our museum, or our members come back and sue us, or the person we're involved in the accident with sues the museum, we have that host liquor liability. We need the liquor liability for special events like this museum properties event. This would be something where we would have the special event coverage.
What if your employee of the museum is serving the liquor for that?
That would be the host liquor liability, yes. Unless you're selling it, and that's when you need the special liquor liability, yes.
So if an event is by subscription, that is that you're having an event at your headquarters and...
For the public.
No, or it's just Dames.
Just Dames, that's the host liquor.
That does cover.
Yeah.
But what if it's an event that the public also subscribes to?
Then that's a fundraising event. Yeah, then you ought to have liquor liability, special event coverage. Cyber liability is something that most museums and societies really haven't thought about before. More and more museums and organizations have a real presence on the internet. And information is exchanged electronically about our members, about our employees, and we have a cyber liability exposure, ladies. And that is not covered under any other policy out there. You have to have a specific cyber liability policy to pick up coverage. The cost is reasonable. Ask your agent for it. Find it tomorrow. The primary coverage that you pick up is for failure to protect private information, loss of private data, and security breach. There hasn't been a lot of litigation against nonprofits for this type of claim, but the fines and penalties can be steep for the accidental release of private information, and that's what this coverage can help you with. So I recommend that you go on and add this to your insurance program. The last coverages that I'm going to talk about are management liability coverages, directors and officers liability, and employment practices liability. Who needs D&O coverage? anyone serving on a board and who's a director or an officer of that board. You all are personally liable for your actions and decisions as board members. I'll say it again. You are personally liable for your actions as board members. While there is governmental immunity in many states that will protect you for that, who is going to pay the defense costs for the allegations that may come against you? The government will not pay the defense cost. Your D&O policy, however, will pay the defense cost. So, let's say, who does this policy protect? It protects directors, officers, trustees, past, present, and future. So if you have rotated off a board and a lawsuit comes in for some action a year or two ago, you are still protected. And that is a really good feeling, past, present, and future. And it's for those that for failing to fulfill their duties or responsibilities imposed by statute. And what can you be held liable for? The breach of your duties as board members. Yesterday, something kind of started tickling the back of my brain, and I heard several things about separate 501(c)(3)s cropping up for friends groups and those types of things. And I just want to remind you all, separate 501(c)(3)s would not automatically be covered under your museum or your society's D&O policy. You're going to need your own. Okay. So just beware of that. The state society's D&O policy automatically picks up coverage for your museum if it's under your 501(c)(3). It picks up coverage for your committee members, your chairman and so forth, your town committees. So it's a really broad policy. But once you start organizing yourself differently and setting up all these new 501(c)(3)s, you're governing yourself differently, and you also need new insurance to protect yourself that way. What are the basic executive duties and duties of board members? They are the duty of diligence, loyalty, and obedience. And your best defense as a board member is the business judgment rule. And that is that you should be acting in good faith with the best interests of your organization and to act rationally in all situations and to act like an ordinarily prudent person would do in a similar situation. And I think that's I'm running out of time. And I want to leave you with three things. To partner with an expert in insurance for historic properties. These are leading causes of claims against boards. Average cost of defense and settlements. A good reason just to buy the coverage itself. Employment practices liability, harassment, discrimination, wage and hour suits is the fastest growing area of litigation. That comes along with your D&O, usually at not much additional cost. I'm going to skip over this just due to time. The things, whoops, go back one slide. Frequency breeds severity. If you have something that's happening at your property all the time, nip it in the bud now, whether it's a bad board member, a bad employee, a slippery brick, fix it now. A bad claim's going to happen. Find a good professional advisor who deals with historic properties. And when you have a loss, call it in immediately. It's your job to limit the loss, protect your property, and it's your job to prove your loss and to understand your insurance. Thank you all very much.